Close your eyes and let yourself settle into comfort. Tonight, we're traveling back through an almost unimaginable span of time, to an era when the very act of surviving each day required skills and endurance that would challenge even the most prepared among us today. Imagine yourself stepping into a world where the distinction between shelter and exposure, between warmth and cold, between safety and danger, was measured not in degrees of comfort, but in the simple question of whether you would see another dawn. The cave seems like sanctuary at first glance. Its mouth opens like a protective embrace against the endless expanse of an untamed landscape. Stone walls promise protection from the howling winds that carry the scent of snow and the distant calls of predators. But as you'll discover in the hours ahead, what appears to be refuge quickly reveals itself as a complex environment of smoke-filled air, territorial disputes, and the constant presence of creatures far more adapted to this harsh world than any modern human could ever be. Picture yourself standing at the threshold of such a cave, perhaps 40,000 years ago, when the world was locked in the grip of an ice age. The landscape stretches endlessly before you, vast tundra broken by scattered stands of hardy trees, their branches bent and twisted by relentless wind. Behind you, the cave mouth yawns like a throat, promising warmth, but demanding sacrifices you cannot yet imagine. The air carries the metallic taste of approaching snow, and somewhere in the distance, the haunting call of a mammoth echoes across the frozen ground. This is not the romanticized Stone Age of popular imagination, with its noble hunters and cozy hearths. This is a world where every calorie consumed represented a victory against starvation, where every night survived was a triumph over the darkness that claimed so many. The average human lifespan hovered around 30 years, not because of war or violence, but because of the simple, relentless pressure of existing in a world that was not yet tamed. We begin our journey in the most immediate and visceral way possible, by experiencing what it would actually feel like to attempt the most basic necessity of cave life, creating fire. You'll feel the sting of smoke in your eyes, hear the desperate coughing of children whose lungs struggle with the acrid air, and understand why maintaining flame was both salvation and torment. From there, we'll explore the mysterious disappearance of our ancient cousins, the Denisovans, whose story reminds us how precarious human existence once was and how easily entire branches of humanity could simply vanish into the depths of prehistory. We'll examine the hidden meanings behind the art that adorned these ancient walls, where hands pressed against stone became something far more profound than decoration. They became desperate assertions of human presence in an indifferent universe. And finally, we'll uncover the subtle but crucial power structures that determined who lived, who died, and who controlled the most precious resources in these underground communities, where leadership meant the difference between group survival and collective extinction. Let yourself sink deeper into relaxation as we embark on this journey through time, where every detail will remind you of the extraordinary comfort and safety of your present moment. Feel the warmth of your bed, the security of your shelter, the ease of your breathing, luxuries that would have been beyond the wildest dreams of our ancient ancestors. Imagine yourself crouched on the rough stone floor of a cave 43,000 years ago. Your knees press against the cold, uneven surface, and you can feel moisture seeping through the hide you've wrapped around your legs. The darkness around you is absolute, not the gentle darkness of a modern bedroom, but the profound, oppressive blackness that existed before humanity learned to push back the night with anything more reliable than flickering flame. Your hands fumble with a small bundle of dry tinder, precious scraps of birch bark and dried grass that took hours to gather and prepare. Each piece represents time and energy you could barely afford to spend, yet without fire, you and the 12 other souls huddled in this limestone refuge will not survive the night. The temperature outside has dropped below freezing, and the wind howling through the cave mouth carries the promise of snow that could trap you here for days. You strike the flint against the iron pyrite, a technique your father taught you and his father taught him. passed down through generations who understood that knowledge of fire-making was quite literally the knowledge of life and death. The sparks fly briefly, tiny stars in the darkness, and for a moment, hope flickers as bright as the fleeting light. But the tinder is slightly damp from the cave's perpetual humidity, and the sparks die without catching. Around you, you can hear the breathing of your family group, the shallow, labored breathing of your youngest sister, barely 3 years old, whose body struggles to maintain warmth in this environment that seems designed to leech the life from human beings. Her breath comes in small puffs of visible vapor, and occasionally she releases a small whimper that seems to echo off the cave walls and multiply in the darkness. You try again. Strike the flint, watch the sparks, blow gently on the tinder. This time, a tiny orange glow appears, no larger than a grain of wheat, but it represents everything: warmth, cooked food, protection, light to keep the darkness at bay. You blow softly, your breath controlled and deliberate, because too much air will extinguish this fragile beginning of flame, and too little will let it die from lack of oxygen. The tinder catches. A small flame dances to life, and immediately you begin adding the smallest twigs, then slightly larger ones, building the fire with the patience and precision of someone who knows that haste will result in cold and darkness. The first wisps of smoke begin to rise, and you direct them carefully toward the cave mouth. But the wind outside creates unpredictable drafts that send much of the smoke swirling back into the living space. Within minutes, your eyes begin to water. The smoke, heavy with the acrid scent of burning wood and the sharper notes of resinous bark, seems to seek out every pair of lungs in the cave. Your youngest sister begins to cough, a harsh barking sound that speaks of lungs not yet fully developed enough to filter the polluted air efficiently. Soon, the coughing spreads. Your brother's wife, heavy with her second child, doubles over as spasms rack her chest. The sound echoes off the cave walls, multiplying until it seems the very stone is coughing. But you cannot let the fire die. Outside, the temperature continues to drop, and you know from experience that by dawn, anyone sleeping without the warmth of flame will be found stiff and cold, their breath permanently stilled. So you feed the fire more wood, accepting that the smoke is simply part of the bargain you make with survival. The cave fills with a hazy atmosphere that burns your throat and makes your chest tight. Every breath requires conscious effort, and you find yourself breathing shallowly, trying to minimize the irritation while still getting enough oxygen to function. Your eyes stream constantly now, producing tears that cut tracks through the soot already accumulating on your cheeks. Your father, the oldest member of your group at the advanced age of 38, begins to wheeze with each inhalation. His lungs, damaged by decades of breathing smoke in poorly ventilated caves, struggle with the polluted air. Yet he says nothing about his discomfort, because he knows, as you all know, that complaining about smoke is like complaining about breathing itself. It is simply a necessary part of staying alive. The fire grows stronger, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls and providing enough light to see the faces of your family. But the light comes at a cost. The smoke has created a permanent haze that hangs at about shoulder height, meaning everyone must either crouch constantly or accept breathing the worst of the contaminated air. Children adapt by staying close to the ground, but pregnant women and the elderly suffer most, their bodies already stressed by the demands of survival. As the night deepens, the smoke becomes not just an irritant, but a hazard. Your youngest sister's cough develops a wet, rattling quality that speaks of inflammation deep in her lungs. She struggles to sleep, her small body racked by coughing fits that leave her gasping and exhausted. In the modern world, such symptoms would trigger immediate medical attention. Here, they are simply accepted as part of the price of warmth. You realize that maintaining fire is an active, constant task. Every few minutes, you must add fuel, adjust the wood to ensure proper burning, and try to direct the smoke toward the cave mouth. But the wind outside is unpredictable, sometimes drawing the smoke out effectively, other times reversing and blowing it back into your living space with renewed intensity. The cycle continues through the night. Tend the fire, breathe the smoke, cough, wheeze, and tend the fire again. Your throat becomes raw and swollen. Your lungs ache with each breath. Your eyes burn constantly, producing tears that offer no relief because the irritant is in the air itself, not on your eyes. By morning, everyone in the cave will be exhausted not just from the interrupted sleep, but from the physical stress of breathing contaminated air for 8 hours. Your youngest sister will wake with a fever, her body's response to the assault on her respiratory system. Your father's wheeze will be worse, a reminder that each winter of smoke exposure brings him closer to the day when his damaged lungs will simply stop processing air efficiently enough to sustain life. Yet as dawn breaks and you finally allow the fire to burn down to coals, you feel not despair, but a grim satisfaction. You have survived another night. The fire you built and maintained through hours of suffering has kept hypothermia at bay. The smoke that tortured your lungs has been the price of staying alive in a world where the margin between life and death was measured in degrees of warmth. This is the reality behind the romantic notion of prehistoric cave dwelling. Not a cozy retreat from the elements, but a daily negotiation with forces that could kill you through comfort as easily as through exposure. The cave provided shelter, but shelter that came with its own mortal dangers, its own slow and grinding form of harm that accumulated over years until it claimed lives as surely as any predator or natural disaster. As the weak light of dawn filters through the cave mouth, you begin to understand that your struggles with fire and smoke were merely the beginning of a much more complex challenge. The cave that seemed like simple shelter in the darkness reveals itself in daylight to be an intricate ecosystem of competing needs, territorial boundaries, and hidden dangers that make modern life seem almost impossibly simple by comparison. You rise from your sleeping place, a shallow depression, UVS, scraped in the cave floor and lined with whatever dried grasses and animal hides you could gather. Your body aches from sleeping on stone, and every joint protests as you stretch muscles that have spent the night contracted against the cold. Around you, the other members of your group are stirring with similar groans and winces, their faces bearing the drawn look of people who have not truly rested but merely survived another night. The cave extends back into darkness beyond where your fire's light could reach, and as your eyes adjust to the dim morning light, you begin to make out details that the night had hidden. This is not simply a hollow in the rock, but a complex system of chambers and passages that create their own microclimate and present their own unique challenges to human habitation. Near the back wall, you notice dark stains on the stone that speak of previous occupants, not just humans, but the larger, more dangerous creatures that used these same caves for shelter long before your kind arrived. The musty scent that permeates the air carries undertones of something wild and predatory, a reminder that your claim to this space is neither permanent nor uncontested. Your father approaches you, his weathered face serious in the gray morning light. Without words, he gestures toward the cave mouth, and you understand that it's time to check for signs of nocturnal visitors. This is a daily ritual that city dwellers could never imagine. The careful examination of the ground outside your shelter for tracks, droppings, or other evidence that you shared the night with creatures that might view you as either threat or prey. Together, you examine the area immediately outside the cave. The soft earth near the entrance tells stories written in mud and frost. Here, the delicate hoofprints of deer that came to shelter from the wind. There, the larger, more ominous tracks of something with claws and pads, possibly a cave lion, possibly a cave bear, both capable of ending human life with casual efficiency. But it's the human tracks that concern your father most. Fresh footprints, clearly made during the night, circle the cave mouth at a distance of perhaps 50 paces. Someone or several someones spent time in the darkness observing your shelter, studying your fire, calculating your strength and vulnerability. In a world where resources are scarce and survival margins thin, other human groups represent potential threats as dangerous as any predator. Your father's jaw tightens as he counts the tracks. At least 4 individuals, moving with the careful, deliberate pace of people conducting reconnaissance. The depth and spacing of the prints suggest adults, probably male, possibly armed with the crude but effective weapons that mean the difference between successful hunting and starvation. "We move today," he says quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that involves risk either way. Staying means potentially facing a confrontation with unknown humans who may outnumber your group and certainly know the local terrain better than you do. Moving means abandoning the shelter you've worked to make habitable, venturing into unknown territory with limited food supplies, and searching for new shelter while potentially being tracked by hostile forces. The morning reveals other challenges that the darkness had hidden. Your youngest sister's cough has worsened during the night, evolving from the dry hack caused by smoke into something deeper and more concerning. Her breathing is labored, and when she coughs, you can see specks of blood on her lips, a sign that the combination of cold air and smoke has damaged the delicate tissues of her lungs. In the modern world, such symptoms would result in immediate medical attention: antibiotics, steroids to reduce inflammation, oxygen therapy if needed. Here, they represent a potential death sentence, another reminder of how precarious human life was in an era before medical intervention. Your mother holds the child close, sharing body heat and trying to ease her breathing, but everyone in the group understands the mathematics of survival. If the cough progresses to full pneumonia, the child will likely die, and there is nothing anyone can do to prevent it. The cave itself presents ongoing challenges that become more apparent as daylight reveals its full character. The floor is uneven, with hidden holes and loose stones that make movement treacherous, especially in darkness. During the night, your uncle twisted his ankle, stepping into an unseen depression, and now his mobility is compromised, just when the group may need to move quickly. Water seeps constantly from cracks in the limestone walls, creating a persistent dampness that never allows clothing or bedding to fully dry. This moisture, combined with the smoke from your fire, creates an environment that promotes respiratory problems, skin infections, and the gradual degradation of the animal hides that represent your only protection against the elements. The dampness also means that maintaining fire becomes exponentially more difficult. Wood gathered from outside must be dried before it can burn efficiently, but the cave's humid atmosphere works against this process. Green wood produces more smoke, burns less efficiently, and requires constant attention to prevent it from going out entirely. You find yourself spending increasing amounts of time and energy simply maintaining the flame that keeps you alive. As the morning progresses, you begin to understand why cave dwelling was not the preferred lifestyle of prehistoric humans, but rather a desperate adaptation to environments too harsh for survival in the open. The cave offers protection from wind and precipitation, but it also concentrates smoke, traps moisture, harbors dangerous animals, and creates territorial conflicts with other human groups seeking the same scarce shelter. Food storage becomes another constant concern. The meat from yesterday's successful hunt must be preserved somehow, but the cave's humidity accelerates spoilage while its openness to outside visitors, both human and animal, makes catching food a risky proposition. You watch your mother working to smoke strips of meat over the fire, balancing the need to preserve protein against the limited supply of fuel and the already problematic air quality in the cave. The social dynamics within the group become more strained under these conditions. 12 people living in close proximity, sharing contaminated air, competing for the warmest sleeping spots near the fire, dealing with illness and injury while facing external threats. Tensions that would be manageable in easier circumstances become sources of potentially deadly conflict. Your brother's wife, struggling with advanced pregnancy and the respiratory irritation from constant smoke exposure, becomes increasingly irritable and demanding. Her condition requires extra food, extra warmth, extra consideration, but resources that go to her are resources unavailable to others in the group. In a world of absolute scarcity, even reasonable needs can become sources of resentment and division. The territorial markings you discover deeper in the cave tell a story of previous human occupation that ended badly. Scratches on the walls that might be primitive art or might be desperate attempts to mark territory. Dark stains that could be from meat preparation or could be from violence. Scattered bones that might be from meals or might be from human remains, hastily buried or left where they fell. As afternoon approaches, your father makes his decision. The group will move, abandoning this shelter for the unknown dangers of the landscape beyond. Everyone begins the laborious process of gathering personal possessions, the few tools, weapons, hides, and preserved food that represent everything you own in the world. Each item must be evaluated for its importance versus its weight, because mobility may mean survival, and excess baggage could prove fatal. Your youngest sister's condition continues to deteriorate. Her breathing becomes more labored with each hour, and the fever that began with exposure to smoke has progressed into something more systemic and dangerous. Moving her in this condition may kill her, but staying in a compromised position with hostile humans in the area will almost certainly result in the death of the entire group. This is the brutal mathematics of prehistoric survival. Decisions where all options carry mortal risk, where there are no good choices, only choices that might possibly result in living another day. The cave that promised shelter has become a trap. The fire that provided warmth has damaged health. The very act of surviving has created new threats that must now be faced with depleted resources and compromised members. As evening approaches and you prepare to abandon your temporary home, you take one final look at the cave that has sheltered and tormented you. The walls still bear the dark stains of smoke from your fire. The floor still holds the depressions where you tried to sleep. The air still carries the scent of your occupation. In a few days, wind and weather will erase most signs of your presence, and the cave will wait for its next desperate occupants. The landscape beyond stretches endlessly under a sky that promises more cold, more wind, more challenges that will test your ability to survive in a world that seems designed to eliminate human life through pure attrition. Yet you gather your possessions, help support your ailing sister, and prepare to venture once again into the uncertainty that has defined human existence for millennia. This is the reality of prehistoric cave dwelling. Not a single night's adventure, but an ongoing negotiation with mortality, where every decision carries life or death, consequences, and where the basic acts of staying warm, breathing clean air, and maintaining security require constant vigilance and frequent compromise. The cave offers shelter, but shelter purchased with smoke-damaged lungs, territorial conflicts, resource competition, and the ever-present possibility that what protects you today may trap you tomorrow. The decision to leave the cave sets in motion a cascade of challenges that reveal just how precarious human existence was in this unforgiving world. As your group gathers the few possessions that mean the difference between life and death, you begin to understand that mobility itself is both salvation and curse. The ability to escape immediate threats, balanced against the constant vulnerability of having no permanent shelter, no cached resources, no familiar territory to provide even the illusion of security. Your youngest sister can barely walk now. The respiratory infection that began with smoke exposure has progressed into something that threatens her life with each labored breath. Your mother fashions a crude carrier from animal hide and wooden poles, creating a stretcher that will allow the group to transport the child. But this decision immediately changes the mathematics of travel. 2 adults must now be dedicated to carrying her. reducing the group's ability to hunt, gather food, or defend itself against threats. The morning air outside the cave carries the metallic scent of approaching snow, and the wind has shifted to blow from the north, bringing with it the promise of weather that could trap an unprepared group in the open with fatal results. Your father studies the sky with the practiced eye of someone who has learned to read atmospheric conditions as a matter of survival. And what he sees there makes his weathered face even more grim. 2 days, he says quietly, indicating the time he estimates before the storm arrives. 2 days to find new shelter, establish a defendable position, gather fuel for fire, and prepare for what could be a week-long period of confinement while the weather makes travel impossible. In the modern world, such a timeline would seem generous for almost any task. Here, it feels impossibly short for accomplishing everything necessary for group survival. The landscape that stretches before you is both beautiful and terrifying in its indifference to human needs. Rolling hills covered in sparse vegetation extend to the horizon, broken by stands of stunted trees that offer minimal shelter and limited fuel. The ground is hard with frost, making travel difficult and food gathering nearly impossible. What game animals remain active in these conditions will be lean, wary, and competing with other predators for the same scarce resources your group desperately needs. As you begin to walk, carrying your portion of the group's possessions, you feel the weight of everything required for survival pressing down on your shoulders. The hide shelter that might mean the difference between life and death in a storm weighs more than modern camping equipment, but provides far less protection. The primitive tools that represent your only means of obtaining food and defending yourself are heavy, awkward, and require constant maintenance to remain effective. Your uncle, still limping from his injured ankle, struggles to keep pace with the group's necessary speed. Every few hundred yards, he must stop to rest, his face pale with pain and the effort of walking on an injury that in the modern world would be treated with anti-inflammatory medication, supportive bracing, and a recommendation to avoid strenuous activity. Here, his choices are simple: walk or be left behind to die. The search for new shelter becomes an increasingly desperate race against time and weather. Each potential cave or rock overhang must be carefully investigated for signs of current occupation by animals or humans, evaluated for defensive capabilities, tested for water seepage and ventilation, and assessed for proximity to fuel and food sources. What appears to be suitable shelter from a distance often reveals fatal flaws upon closer inspection. The first cave you investigate shows clear signs of recent occupation by cave bears. Massive claw marks on the walls, the heavy musk of large predators, and scattered bones that speak of kills dragged here for consumption. Even if the bears are currently absent, their scent marks this territory as claimed, and returning inhabitants would view your group as invaders to be eliminated with extreme prejudice. The second potential shelter is too shallow, offering no protection from wind-driven snow and insufficient space for the entire group to sleep safely around a fire. The third is too deep, extending back into passages that could hide threats or trap the group if the entrance becomes blocked. Each rejected option costs precious time and energy while the weather continues to deteriorate and your youngest sister's condition grows more critical. As afternoon arrives, your group makes a discovery that illustrates the harsh realities of prehistoric human existence. In a sheltered valley, you find the remains of another human group that made this journey before you and failed to complete it successfully. Scattered bones, both human and animal, tell a story of gradual starvation and exposure. Broken tools speak of equipment failure at critical moments. The positioning of the remains suggests that the group died not all at once, but gradually, as the weakest members succumbed first to cold, hunger, and disease. Your father examines the scene with professional detachment, searching for anything useful among the remnants while using the evidence to understand what went wrong for these previous travelers. A broken spear point suggests unsuccessful hunting. Scattered hide fragments indicate shelter that failed during a storm. The absence of fire-starting materials implies that the group lost the ability to create warmth and cook food, beginning the cascade of failures that led to their deaths. But the scene also provides resources that your group desperately needs. Bone tools that survived their previous owners can be repurposed for your use. Hide fragments, while damaged, can be incorporated into your shelter materials. Most importantly, the location itself, sheltered from the worst winds and with access to a small stream, represents a possible temporary camp while you search for more permanent accommodation. The decision to camp among the remains of dead humans reflects the brutal pragmatism required for survival in this environment. Emotional responses to death, while natural, represent luxuries that can prove fatal when resources are scarce and time is limited. Your group has no choice but to use whatever advantages the site provides, while remaining alert to the dangers that killed its previous occupants. As you help establish the temporary camp, you begin to understand the relentless physical demands that prehistoric survival placed on human bodies. Every task requires significantly more energy than modern equivalents, from gathering fuel for fire to processing food for consumption. Your hands, already cracked and damaged from exposure to cold and rough materials, develop new cuts and abrasions from handling stone tools and rough wood. The constant physical stress combines with nutritional deficiencies to create a cascade of health problems that would be easily treatable in the modern world but represent serious threats here. Minor cuts become infected without antiseptic treatment. Nutritional deficiencies lead to weakness, impaired healing, and increased susceptibility to disease. The accumulated damage from breathing smoke-filled air combines with exposure to cold and dampness to create respiratory problems that worsen progressively over time. Your youngest sister's condition continues to deteriorate as the group establishes camp. Her breathing becomes increasingly labored, and periods of consciousness become shorter and less coherent. Your mother maintains a constant vigil, sharing body heat and trying to ease the child's suffering. But everyone in the group understands that without medical intervention impossible in this time and place, the outcome is likely to be fatal. The approaching storm arrives earlier than your father predicted, beginning with fine snow that quickly intensifies into a blinding whirl of wind and ice. Within hours, visibility drops to mere feet, and the temperature plunges well below freezing. Your temporary shelter, hastily constructed from available materials and the remnants left by previous occupants, provides minimal protection against the storm's fury. Huddled together in the inadequate shelter, breathing air thick with smoke from a fire that struggles against the wind, you experience the full horror of prehistoric winter survival. Every breath is an effort. Every movement requires conscious decision about energy expenditure. Every hour survived represents a small victory against forces that seem determined to end human life through pure attrition. The storm continues for 3 days, during which your group consumes most of its remaining food supplies while unable to hunt or gather additional resources. Water comes from melted snow, but fuel for melting becomes increasingly scarce as the wind makes it impossible to venture outside for more wood. The mathematical reality of survival becomes starkly apparent. Input versus output, calories consumed versus calories available, fuel burned versus fuel gathered. On the second day of the storm, your youngest sister dies. Her small body, weakened by respiratory infection and unable to maintain core temperature in the harsh conditions, simply stops fighting the multiple stresses that have overwhelmed her system. The death is quiet, almost peaceful, a gradual cessation of breathing that occurs during sleep. But its impact on group morale and survival calculations is devastating. In the modern world, such a death would trigger grief counseling, funeral preparations, legal procedures, and community support systems. Here, it requires immediate practical decisions about resource allocation and group mobility. The child's body cannot be buried in the frozen ground, but leaving it unburied will attract scavengers that could threaten the living members of the group. Your father makes the difficult decision to place the small body outside the shelter, weighted down with stones to prevent scavengers from scattering the remains, but otherwise left to the elements. There is no time for elaborate funeral rituals, no energy for extended mourning, no resources for anything beyond basic respect for the dead. Survival of the living takes precedence over everything else, including traditional human responses to mortality. The loss of your sister changes the group dynamics in ways that extend beyond grief. Her death represents both a reduction in resource, competition, and a psychological blow that saps morale and energy from every survivor. The carrying equipment constructed for her transport becomes available for other uses, but the energy spent constructing it and the two adults dedicated to carrying her represent wasted resources that could have been allocated differently. When the storm finally passes, your group emerges from the inadequate shelter to find a landscape transformed by snow and ice. The already difficult task of finding food has become nearly impossible, as most plant materials are buried under snow, and game animals have either migrated to more hospitable areas or gone into hiding until conditions improve. The death of your sister serves as harsh reminder that in prehistoric times, human life was always conditional, always temporary, always subject to forces beyond individual or even group control. Survival was not about thriving or finding comfort, but about enduring each day's challenges long enough to face the next day's equally deadly threats. As you help break camp and prepare to continue the search for more permanent shelter, you carry with you the understanding that every step forward represents both progress toward potential safety and movement into new, unknown dangers. The landscape ahead promises more challenges, more difficult decisions, more losses that will test the group's ability to maintain cohesion in the face of ongoing trauma. This is the rhythm of prehistoric survival. Not a single dramatic struggle, but an endless series of small defeats and minor victories, where success is measured not in comfort or achievement, but in the simple fact of continued breathing, continued movement, continued hope that tomorrow might offer slightly better chances than today. The cave you abandoned now seems like luxury compared to the open landscape ahead. But even that remembered luxury came with costs that damaged health, created conflicts, and ultimately proved unsustainable. Every prehistoric human who lived to adulthood had survived countless challenges that would prove fatal to modern individuals, had developed physical and mental resilience that modern life rarely requires, and had accepted levels of risk, discomfort, and uncertainty that contemporary society works desperately to eliminate. The simple act of lasting a single day in such conditions represents an achievement that few modern humans could accomplish, even with advanced preparation and contemporary equipment. As we transition from the immediate, visceral reality of cave survival to a broader perspective on human prehistory, let yourself settle more deeply into comfort. The struggles you've just witnessed, the smoke, the cold, the desperate search for shelter, were not unique to any single group of ancient humans. Across the vast expanse of prehistoric time, multiple branches of the human family tree faced these same challenges, developed their own solutions, and ultimately met their own fates in the endless dance between survival and extinction. Imagine yourself now not as a participant in prehistoric survival, but as an observer looking back across tens of thousands of years, watching the slow unfolding of human evolution and migration across the planet. From this perspective, the individual struggles for warmth and shelter become part of a much larger story, the story of how different human species spread across the world, adapted to diverse environments, and either survived to become our ancestors or vanished into the deep silence of prehistory. Among all the human species that once walked the earth, perhaps none captures our imagination quite like the Denisovans, a group so recently discovered that their very existence challenges everything we thought we knew about human evolution and dispersal. Their story begins not with dramatic archaeological discoveries or ancient artifacts, but with something as small and seemingly insignificant as a fragment of finger bone found in a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The Denisova Cave, from which this human group takes its name, sits in one of the most remote and challenging environments on Earth. Picture yourself standing at its entrance in the depths of a Siberian winter, where temperatures routinely drop to 40 degrees below zero, where the wind carries ice crystals that can blind the unwary, where survival requires not just the basic skills you witnessed in our earlier cave-dwelling scenario, but adaptations to conditions that push the very limits of human endurance. This cave, discovered by Soviet archaeologists in the 1970s, seemed at first to hold familiar secrets: stone tools, animal bones, the expected debris of ancient human occupation. For decades, researchers assumed they were looking at evidence of Neanderthal activity, those robust cousins of modern humans who were known to have occupied much of Europe and Western Asia during the Ice Ages. The bone fragments and teeth found in the cave's deposits fit the expected pattern of human occupation during periods when the climate was slightly less harsh than the present day. But in 2008, a single finger bone changed everything we thought we knew about human evolution. The bone itself was unremarkable. A small fragment from the tip of a child's finger, dark with age and containing no obvious distinguishing features that would indicate its revolutionary significance. Yet when researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany extracted DNA from this tiny remnant, they discovered something that shouldn't have existed. The genetic material preserved in that finger bone did not match modern humans. It did not match Neanderthals. It represented something entirely unexpected, a third branch of the human family tree that had been completely unknown to science. The DNA was human, but human in a way that suggested a lineage that had separated from our own ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago, developing independently through countless generations of adaptation to environments and challenges we can barely imagine. Dr. Svante Puobo, the pioneering geneticist who led the analysis, later described the moment of discovery as one of the most startling in his career. Here was evidence of an entire human population that had lived, loved, struggled, and died without leaving any trace in the historical or archaeological record beyond this single, precious fragment of genetic material. The implications were staggering. If one unknown human species could remain hidden until 2008, how many others might have existed and vanished without leaving any trace at all? The Denisovans, as they came to be known, present us with a mystery that deepens rather than resolves with each new discovery. Unlike Neanderthals, who left behind a rich archaeological record of tools, art, and burial practices, the Denisovans seem to have vanished almost without trace. We know they existed. We know they interbred with other human populations. We know their genes survive in modern humans today, but we know almost nothing about how they lived, what they believed, or why they disappeared. The genetic evidence suggests that Denisovans were not confined to the Siberian cave where they were first discovered. Their DNA appears in modern populations across a vast area extending from Tibet to Australia, indicating a range that spanned much of Asia and possibly extended into regions that are now underwater due to changes in sea level since the Ice Ages. This suggests a population that was not only successful but widespread, capable of adapting to diverse environments from high-altitude plateaus to tropical islands. Yet despite this apparent success, the Denisovans vanished completely from the archaeological record sometime between 40,000 and 50,000 years ago, leaving behind only genetic echoes in the genomes of modern humans and a handful of bone fragments and teeth from a single cave in Siberia. Their disappearance represents one of the most complete extinctions in human prehistory, an entire branch of the human family tree that simply ceased to exist, leaving no descendants, no cultural legacy, no memory of their existence until modern genetics resurrected them from ancient DNA. The mystery deepens when we consider the environment in which the Denisovan remains were found. The Altai Mountains, even during the warmer periods of prehistory, represented one of the most challenging environments for human survival. Winters were longer and harsher than almost anywhere else humans had attempted to live. Summer growing seasons were short and unpredictable. The altitude made oxygen scarce, adding another layer of physiological stress to the already demanding task of survival. Yet the Denisovans not only survived in this environment, but apparently thrived there for thousands of years. The cave deposits contain evidence of repeated occupation over many generations, suggesting a population that had successfully adapted to conditions that would challenge even modern humans equipped with contemporary technology. They developed strategies for surviving Siberian winters, for finding food in a landscape locked in ice for much of the year, for maintaining population stability in an environment where a single bad season could mean starvation for an entire group. Recent genetic analysis has revealed that modern Tibetans carry Denisovan gene variants that help them survive at high altitude, suggesting that these ancient humans had developed biological adaptations to low oxygen environments that proved so effective they continue to benefit their descendants today. The gene EPAS1, which helps regulate oxygen use in the blood, appears to have been passed from Denisovans to modern humans through interbreeding, providing a survival advantage that allowed human populations to colonize some of the highest habitable regions on Earth. This genetic inheritance tells you something remarkable about Denisovan physiology and adaptation. Living at high altitude for thousands of years had shaped their bodies in ways that improved. Oxygen efficiency allowed them to function normally in conditions that would quickly incapacitate lowland populations and gave them advantages that were so significant they persist in modern humans today. These were not primitive humans struggling to survive, but a sophisticated population that had achieved remarkable biological adaptations to their environment. The tool technology found in association with Denisovan remains suggests a level of sophistication that matches or exceeds that of contemporary Neanderthal populations. Stone blades show evidence of careful preparation and skilled knapping techniques. Bone tools demonstrate understanding of material properties and functional design. Most remarkably, researchers have found evidence of jewelry, a bracelet made from chloridolite, a dark green stone that required sophisticated drilling and polishing techniques to work. This bracelet, dated to approximately 40,000 years ago, represents one of the earliest examples of complex jewelry-making technology found anywhere in the world. The precision of the drilling, the smoothness of the polish, and the uniformity of the design suggest not just technical skill, but aesthetic sensibility. Evidence that Denisovans were capable of creating beauty for its own sake, not just tools for survival. This single artifact hints at a rich cultural life that has otherwise vanished completely from the archaeological record. The mystery of Denisovan disappearance becomes even more puzzling when we consider their apparent success. They had adapted to challenging environments, developed sophisticated technology, created complex cultural artifacts, and spread across vast geographical areas. By all measures of prehistoric success, they should have survived and flourished. Yet something happened between 40,000 and 50,000 years ago that resulted in their complete extinction as a distinct human species. One possibility is that climate change made their specialized adaptations disadvantageous. The end of the last ice age brought warmer temperatures and changing precipitation patterns that could have disrupted the ecological systems on which Denisovan survival depended. Populations adapted to extreme cold might have struggled as their environments became warmer and more unpredictable. Specialized hunting strategies developed for Ice Age fauna might have become ineffective as animal populations changed and migrated. Another possibility is competition with expanding populations of modern humans. As Homo sapiens spread out of Africa and across Asia, they may have occupied the same ecological niches that Denisovans depended upon, creating competition for resources that the smaller Denisovan population could not win. Modern humans may have had advantages in population size, social organization, or technology that gave them decisive advantages in competition for territory and resources. The genetic evidence shows that interbreeding occurred between Denisovans and modern humans, but this hybridization may have ultimately contributed to their extinction as a distinct species. If Denisovan populations were small and geographically isolated, genetic mixing with larger modern human populations could have resulted in the gradual absorption of Denisovan genes into the modern human gene pool without maintaining distinct Denisovan populations. Disease represents another possible factor in Denisovan extinction. Contact with modern human populations spreading from Africa could have introduced pathogens to which Denisovans had no immunity. In the modern world, we've seen how contact between previously isolated populations can result in devastating epidemics that disproportionately affect populations with no previous exposure to specific diseases. Similar processes could have contributed to Denisovan population decline and eventual extinction. The more we learn about the Denisovans, the more their disappearance seems both mysterious and tragic. Here was a human population that had achieved remarkable adaptations to challenging environments, had developed sophisticated technology and cultural expressions, and had successfully survived for hundreds of thousands of years in some of the most demanding conditions on Earth. Yet they vanished so completely that we had no knowledge of their existence until the development of ancient DNA analysis techniques in the 21st century. Their story serves as a sobering reminder of how precarious human existence has been throughout prehistory. Success in one era or environment provides no guarantee of survival when conditions change. Populations that seemed stable and well adapted could disappear completely, leaving only faint genetic traces to mark their passing. The Denisovans represent not just an extinct human species, but a window into the countless other human populations that may have existed and vanished without leaving any trace at all. As we delve deeper into the mystery of the Denisovans, imagine yourself as a detective working with evidence so fragmentary and ancient that each clue must be examined with the precision of a jeweler and the patience of a monk. The story we're piecing together spans hundreds of thousands of years, crosses continents, and involves populations of humans whose daily lives were shaped by challenges we can barely comprehend, yet whose genetic legacy continues to influence human biology today. The second major breakthrough in Denisovan research came not from Siberia, but from an unexpected source thousands of miles away. In 2010, researchers analyzing the genomes of modern human populations made a startling discovery. People living in Papua New Guinea, Australia, and other parts of Melanesia carried substantial amounts of Denisovan DNA in their genomes, far more than any other modern human population, and far more than could be explained by the small amount of Denisovan genetic material found in most other groups. This discovery fundamentally changed our understanding of Denisovan geography and success. Rather than being a small, isolated population confined to the harsh environment of the Altai Mountains, the Denisovans must have been widespread and numerous enough to contribute significantly to the ancestry of multiple modern human populations. The genetic evidence suggested that somewhere in Southeast Asia, perhaps 50,000 years ago, Denisovan populations and the ancestors of modern Melanesians had lived in close proximity long enough for substantial interbreeding to occur. But where were these Southeast Asian Denisovans? If they had been numerous enough to contribute significantly to modern human genetics, why had no archaeological traces been found? The absence of physical evidence from what should have been their core territory presented researchers with a puzzle that highlighted just how much of human prehistory remains hidden from our understanding. The answer, when it began to emerge, revealed the devastating impact that changing sea levels can have on archaeological evidence. During the Ice Ages, when much of the world's water was locked up in glaciers, sea levels were more than 300 feet lower than they are today. Vast areas of what is now the ocean floor were dry land, supporting forests, rivers, and human populations. The land bridge that connected Asia to Australia was not a narrow crossing, but a substantial continent called Sahul, with an area larger than modern India. This now submerged continent would have provided ideal habitat for human populations, tropical and subtropical environments rich in plant and animal resources, river systems that could support substantial populations, and geographic features that could provide natural shelter and defense. If Denisovan populations had established themselves in these areas, their archaeological remains would now lie beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water, effectively invisible to conventional archaeological investigation. The realization that much of Denisovan territory now lies underwater helps explain the paradox of their genetic presence and archaeological absence, but it also underscores the magnitude of what we've lost to changing climate and geography. Entire chapters of human prehistory, potentially including sophisticated cultures and technological developments, may be preserved only in the deep ocean sediments or completely destroyed by thousands of years of marine erosion. Recent advances in underwater archaeology have begun to reveal tantalizing glimpses of what lies beneath the waves. Off the coast of Australia, researchers have discovered stone tools and other artifacts in areas that were dry land during the Ice Ages, providing the first physical evidence of human occupation in the now submerged territories where Denisovans may have lived. These underwater sites are extraordinarily difficult to excavate and study, requiring specialized equipment and techniques that make each investigation costly and time-consuming. The few artifacts recovered from these underwater sites tell a story of sophisticated human adaptation to tropical environments. Stone tools show evidence of specialized techniques for working with tropical woods and plant materials. Shell middens indicate the exploitation of marine resources and suggest populations large enough to leave substantial archaeological deposits. Most intriguingly, some sites show evidence of systematic landscape modification, the deliberate alteration of natural features to create more favorable conditions for human habitation. These discoveries raise the possibility that Denisovan populations in Southeast Asia had developed cultural and technological adaptations quite different from those of their Siberian relatives. Rather than specializing in survival in harsh, cold environments, these tropical Denisovans may have become experts at exploiting the rich but complex ecosystems of tropical forests and coastal areas. Their disappearance may have involved different factors and occurred at different times than the extinction of their cold-adapted northern cousins. The genetic evidence provides additional clues about Denisovan population structure and migration patterns. Analysis of ancient DNA from multiple sites suggests that there were at least two, and possibly more, distinct Denisovan populations that had been separated from each other for tens of thousands of years. The Altai Denisovans represent one branch of this family tree, while the ancestors of the Denisovan genes found in modern Melanesian populations represent another branch that had diverged much earlier. This population structure suggests a complex history of migration, separation, and adaptation that we're only beginning to understand. Denisovan populations may have spread across Asia in multiple waves, establishing distinct regional populations that adapted to local conditions while maintaining enough genetic continuity to be recognizable as part of the same species. The patterns of genetic diversity hint at populations that were large enough and stable enough to maintain distinct regional characteristics over many thousands of years. One of the most intriguing aspects of Denisovan genetics is the evidence for multiple episodes of interbreeding with other human populations. The genetic signatures suggest that Denisovans interbred not only with the ancestors of modern humans, but also with other, as yet unidentified human populations that may represent additional branches of the human family tree that have since gone extinct. These ghost populations, known only from their genetic contributions to Denisovan genomes, add another layer of complexity to the story of human evolution in Asia. The genetic evidence suggests that the Asian continent during the Middle and Late Pleistocene was home to a diverse array of human populations, some closely related to each other, and others separated by hundreds of thousands of years of independent evolution. The technology associated with Denisovan populations provides another window into their capabilities and adaptations. Beyond the sophisticated stone tools and jewelry found in the Altai cave, researchers have identified technological innovations that may be associated with Denisovan populations or their interactions with other human groups. These include some of the earliest evidence for the systematic use of fire in high-altitude environments, specialized hunting technologies adapted for cold weather prey, and sophisticated techniques for working bone and antler into complex tools. Perhaps most remarkably, some researchers have suggested that certain technological innovations traditionally attributed to modern humans may actually have Denisovan origins. The development of specialized high-altitude adaptations, certain types of stone tool technology, and even some forms of symbolic behavior may have been pioneered by Denisovan populations and later adopted by modern humans through cultural exchange or interbreeding. This possibility challenges traditional narratives about human technological development, which typically assume that innovations flowed primarily from modern human populations to other human species. The Denisovan evidence suggests that technological and cultural exchange in prehistoric Asia may have been more complex and multidirectional than previously recognized, with different human populations contributing innovations that benefited the survival and success of all groups. The extinction of the Denisovans becomes even more puzzling when we consider the evidence for their technological sophistication and successful adaptation to diverse environments. They had clearly solved many of the fundamental challenges of human survival in both cold and tropical environments, had developed technologies that were as sophisticated as those of contemporary modern human populations, and had maintained stable populations across vast geographical areas for hundreds of thousands of years. Recent research has begun to explore the possibility that Denisovan extinction was not a single event, but a gradual process that occurred at different times in different regions. The Altai populations may have disappeared earlier than their tropical counterparts, possibly due to the specific challenges of surviving in extremely cold environments as climate conditions changed. The Southeast Asian populations may have persisted longer, eventually being absorbed into expanding modern human populations through interbreeding rather than direct competition or conflict. This gradual extinction model helps explain why Denisovan genetic contributions are so variable among modern human populations. Groups that had prolonged contact with surviving Denisovan populations would carry more Denisovan DNA, while groups that encountered Denisovans only briefly or not at all would carry little or none. The geographic distribution of Denisovan ancestry in modern humans reflects not just the original distribution of Denisovan populations, but also the timing and nature of contact between Denisovans and the ancestors of different modern human groups. The study of Denisovan extinction has broader implications for understanding human survival and adaptation throughout prehistory. The factors that may have contributed to their disappearance: climate change, competition with other human populations, disease, genetic absorption through interbreeding, are the same factors that threatened all human populations during the Pleistocene. The success of modern humans and the extinction of Denisovans may have been determined by relatively small differences in population size, geographic distribution, or technological adaptation, rather than fundamental superiority of one group over another. This perspective suggests that human survival throughout prehistory was always precarious, always dependent on factors that could change rapidly and unpredictably. The Denisovans were not evolutionary failures, but successful human populations that happened to encounter circumstances that exceeded their adaptive capabilities. Their story reminds us that the survival of our own ancestors was never guaranteed and depended on countless favorable circumstances and successful adaptations that easily might not have occurred. As we continue to unravel the mystery of the Denisovans, Each new discovery raises as many questions as it answers. New genetic techniques continue to reveal additional complexity in human evolution and interbreeding patterns. New archaeological methods may eventually allow us to explore the underwater sites where much of Denisovan culture may be preserved. New theoretical frameworks help us understand how small populations can persist for long periods before suddenly disappearing due to environmental or demographic pressures. The Denisovans remain tantalizingly elusive, present in our genes but absent from our history books, sophisticated enough to survive for hundreds of millennia, but vulnerable enough to disappear completely from the fossil record. Their story continues to unfold in laboratories around the world, where researchers work to extract ancient DNA from tiny bone fragments, and to decode the genetic signatures that represent the only remaining testimony to their existence. In the quiet of your comfortable rest, consider the profound silence that surrounds the disappearance of an entire human species. The Denisovans lived, struggled, adapted, created, loved, and died across hundreds of thousands of years. Yet they vanished so completely that we learned of their existence only in the 21st century. Their silence reminds us of how much of human experience has been lost to time, how many stories remain untold, how many triumphs and tragedies have left no trace except in the deep archives of our genetic heritage. Picture yourself awakening, not to the gentle hum of central heating or the soft glow of electric light, but to the acrid bite of smoke filling your lungs and the bone-deep chill that seeps through every layer of animal hide you've wrapped around your body. This is morning in a Paleolithic cave shelter, and your first conscious thought isn't about coffee or checking messages. It is about whether the fire has died during the night. The smoke is everywhere. It clings to the rough limestone walls, pools in the irregular ceiling, and seems to follow you no matter where you position yourself in the cave's dim interior. Your eyes water constantly, not from emotion, but from the persistent sting of wood smoke that never quite clears. The tears leave tracks down your soot-stained cheeks, and you've long since given up trying to wipe them away. Your throat feels raw, scratched by countless microscopic particles that no amount of coughing can clear. But this smoke isn't an inconvenience, it's survival itself. Without it, there would be no fire. And without fire, the cave becomes a tomb of stone and ice. You've learned to live with the burn in your lungs, because the alternative is the slow, creeping death that comes with cold. The smoke that irritates is also the smoke that preserves. It keeps the meat from spoiling, that drives away the insects, and that signals to any human within miles that this shelter is occupied, that life persists here against all odds. The fire itself is a living thing that demands constant attention. You cannot simply light it and forget it, as you might a modern campfire built for pleasure. This flame is the heart of your small world, and like any heart, it requires careful tending to keep beating. The wood must be fed to it piece by piece, not too much at once lest you smother it, not too little lest it starve and die. Each log, each branch, each carefully hoarded piece of bark represents hours of gathering, of venturing beyond the cave's protection to scavenge in forests where every shadow might hide danger. You've become intimate with the personality of different woods. The birch bark catches quickly, but burns away like paper, useful for starting the fire, but useless for sustaining it through the long night. Oak burns steady and hot, but it's heavy to carry and hard to find. Pine gives good light, but spits and pops, sending sparks that can ignite the dry grasses you've laid out as bedding. You've learned to read the fire's mood through its color and sound, to know when it needs air and when it needs fuel, when it's burning too hot and when it's in danger of dying. The child beside you, perhaps your own, perhaps the offspring of a cousin or sister, trembles, despite being wrapped in layers of carefully prepared hide. Their small body loses heat faster than yours, and you've positioned them closest to the fire, but still they shiver. Their breath comes in small puffs of vapor, visible even in the cave's relative warmth. You pull them closer, sharing your body heat, feeling the rapid flutter of their heartbeat against your ribs. This is how nights are spent, huddled together, sharing warmth, taking turns feeding the fire, dozing fitfully between the needs of flame and cold. The cave walls themselves tell the story of countless such nights. The stone near the fire pit is blackened with soot, stained by the accumulated smoke of seasons. Certain rocks have cracked from repeated heating and cooling, the limestone splitting along ancient fault lines under the stress of temperature change. Higher up on the walls where the smoke pools before finding its way to cracks and fissures that serve as natural chimneys. A layer of carbon has built up over months or years, a testament to the countless fires that have burned in this same spot. You've arranged the cave's interior with the precision of someone whose life depends on every detail. The fire pit is positioned to draw air from the cave mouth, while allowing smoke to escape through a natural chimney in the ceiling. Your sleeping area is far enough from the fire to avoid sparks, but close enough to benefit from its warmth. The meat drying on wooden racks hangs in the smoke, but away from direct flame. Water containers carved from wood or fashioned from hide sit within reach, but safe from accidental kicks or the stumbling of half-awake cave mates. The process of maintaining the fire is a ritual that structures your entire day. At dawn, you coax life back into the embers that have been carefully banked under ash. You feed it kindling, then larger pieces, watching as the flames grow strong enough to push back the cold that has crept in during the night. Throughout the day, someone must always be mindful of the fire's needs. When the hunters leave, it becomes the responsibility of those who remain, often the pregnant women, the elders, the children old enough to understand the importance, but not yet strong enough to hunt. The smoke has unexpected benefits that you've learned to appreciate. It helps preserve the meat that hangs from the cave ceiling, creating a natural smokehouse that extends the life of your precious protein. It discourages insects, those persistent pests that would otherwise make the cave uninhabitable during warmer months. Most importantly, it masks the human scent that might otherwise attract predators. The cave bear, the cave lion, the hyenas that roam the landscape, they all associate the smell of smoke with humans, and most have learned to give such places a wide berth. But the smoke exacts its price. Your lungs, after months or years of this life, have adapted to the constant irritation, but they'll never be quite the same. The persistent cough that racks your chest during cold mornings isn't just from the night. Its chill is from the accumulated damage of breathing smoke for seasons on end. Your voice carries a permanent rasp, a hoarseness that comes from vocal cords constantly irrigated by particles and heat. When you laugh, which happens more often than you might expect, it often dissolves into coughing that doubles you over. The children born into this environment develop differently than they would in clean air. Their lung capacity adapts to extract oxygen from smoke-tinged air, but their growth sometimes suffers from the reduced oxygen levels. The infant mortality rate in such conditions is heartbreaking by modern standards, but those who survive are tough in ways that modern humans can barely comprehend. Managing the cold is an art form that requires constant vigilance. The cave provides shelter from wind and precipitation, but stone is a poor insulator. The walls and floor radiate cold that seeps through animal hides and layers of dried grass. You've learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when someone is losing the battle against hypothermia, the confused, stumbling, the drowsiness that's different from normal fatigue, the loss of fine motor control that makes it impossible to feed the fire effectively. Your clothing is a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering, though it would look crude to modern eyes. Multiple layers of animal hide, each treated and prepared through processes that take weeks, create a system of insulation that traps warm air while allowing moisture to escape. The inner layer, against your skin, might be the soft hide of a young deer, tanned until it's supple and comfortable. Over this, thicker layers of bear or bison hide provide windproofing and durability. Every piece is precious, representing not just the life of an animal, but the countless hours of work required to transform raw hide into clothing that can mean the difference between life and death. The maintenance of this clothing is a never-ending task. Hides crack and tear, seams split, and the constant wearing gradually breaks down even the best prepared leather. You spend hours each day repairing, adjusting, and maintaining your protective layers. The fat from animals isn't just food, it's also waterproofing for your clothing, conditioning for cracked hide, and fuel for small lamps that provide light for close work. Your hands tell the story of this life more clearly than any written record ever could. The fingertips are permanently stained with soot, the nails worn down to nubs from constant scraping and digging. Cuts and burns heal slowly in the harsh conditions, leaving a map of scars that chronicles your daily battles against the environment. Your palms are calloused from handling rough stone tools and split wood, but they're also sensitive to the subtle changes in temperature that indicate whether the fire needs attention. The rhythm of breathing becomes crucial to survival. You've learned to take shallow breaths when the smoke is particularly thick, to time your inhalations with the natural movement of air through the cave. When the wind changes direction outside, it can either clear the smoke or trap it, and you must quickly adjust your position and breathing accordingly. Sometimes, when the smoke becomes truly unbearable, you must choose between stepping outside into the deadly cold or enduring conditions that make your lungs burn with each breath. Water, when you can find it, becomes another tool in your constant battle against the smoke's effects. A small sip can soothe your raw throat, but water is often scarce and must be rationed carefully. Melting snow or ice requires precious fuel, and the process fills the cave with additional moisture that can make the cold even more penetrating. You learn to time your water consumption, saving it for moments when the coughing becomes so severe that it threatens to wake others, or when your throat is so raw that swallowing food becomes difficult. The cave's geography determines much about your daily struggle with smoke and cold. A cave with poor ventilation becomes a death trap when the fire burns too hot or the wood is too green. One with too much ventilation lets in deadly drafts that can extinguish the fire or make maintaining warmth impossible. The ideal cave, the one that allows your group to survive season after season, has a careful balance. Enough airflow to carry away the worst of the smoke, but not so much that the precious heat escapes. You've become a connoisseur of smoke itself, able to read its color and thickness like a weather report. White smoke usually means the wood is wet or green, burning inefficiently and producing more irritation than heat. Gray smoke indicates a good, hot fire that's burning cleanly. Black smoke, the most dangerous, suggests that something is burning that shouldn't be. Perhaps dried bedding that's caught a spark, or animal fat that's dripping into the fire and flaring up. The constant presence of smoke changes your relationship with all your senses. Your sense of smell, dulled by the persistent acrid odor, must work harder to detect the subtle scents that might indicate danger: the musk of a predator, the sour smell of meat beginning to spoil, or the fresh scent of rain that might mean the opportunity to collect water. Your taste buds, similarly affected, learn to distinguish between the smokiness that enhances food and the bitterness that indicates wood that is too green or resinous to burn safely. As night deepens and the cold presses more insistently against the cave mouth, you arrange the final banking of the fire. This is perhaps the most critical skill you possess, the ability to ensure that embers will survive the night, while minimizing the risk of the fire either dying completely or flaring up dangerously while everyone sleeps. You cover the coals with a carefully calculated amount of ash, leaving just enough air to keep them alive, but not enough to encourage flames. Too much ash, and you'll wake to cold stone and the terrible task of starting fire from scratch. Too little, and the fire might consume all the fuel while you sleep, leaving nothing for the morning. The coughing that echoes through the cave as everyone settles for sleep is not just the sound of respiratory irritation. It is the sound of survival of humans who have found a way to harness one of nature's most dangerous forces and use it to push back against the darkness and cold that would otherwise claim them. Each cough is a testament to adaptation, to the incredible resilience of the human spirit, and to the price our ancestors paid for the gift of fire that would ultimately separate us from every other species on Earth. In the flickering light of that carefully tended flame, surrounded by smoke that burns your eyes and cold that penetrates, your bones you represent one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of life on this planet, a species that learned to survive by embracing the very elements that should have destroyed them, turning the burning wood and choking smoke into tools of survival that would carry humanity through the longest, darkest nights of the Ice Age and beyond. But you are not alone in those ancient caves. As the smoke from your fire drifts upward into the darkness, carried away by currents of air that have flowed through these stone chambers for millennia, imagine that this same smoke once mingled with fires tended by hands that were almost, but not quite, like yours. Picture other eyes reflecting the firelight, other voices murmuring in languages that shared common roots with yours, other hearts beating with the same desperate rhythm of survival against the cold and dark. These were the Denisovans, and their story is one of the most haunting mysteries in all of human history. Tale of an entire branch of humanity that flourished alongside our own ancestors, shared the same harsh world, breathed the same smoky air, and then vanished so completely that we only discovered their existence in the 21st century through fragments of bone and teeth no larger than your thumbnail. The name itself comes from a cave, Denisova Cave, in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, where Russian archaeologists working in the bitter cold of a Siberian winter made one of the most extraordinary discoveries in the history of human origins. In 2008, they found a tiny fragment of a finger bone, a piece of what had once been a child's pinky, lying in the archaeological layers alongside the tools and remnants of ancient fires. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, just another piece of the puzzle that archaeologists spend their lives assembling, one fragment at a time. But when that fragment was subjected to DNA analysis, it revealed something that changed our understanding of human history forever. This was not the bone of a modern human, nor was it from a Neanderthal, our better-known cousins who had shared Europe with our ancestors. This tiny piece of bone contained genetic material that told the story of an entirely unknown lineage of humans, a sister species that had diverged from our common ancestor hundreds of thousands of years ago, and had been living, thriving, and evolving in parallel with us for all that time. Imagine the implications slowly dawning on the scientists who first sequenced that ancient DNA. Picture them in their modern laboratories, surrounded by sophisticated equipment, staring at genetic sequences on computer screens that revealed the existence of ghosts, an entire population of humans who had lived and died and left. Almost no trace except for this whisper of genetic material preserved in the cold, dry conditions of a Siberian cave. The Denisovans, as they came to be called, were not just another group of early humans. They were something more mysterious, more elusive than even the Neanderthals, who at least left behind a substantial fossil record and clear archaeological evidence of their sophisticated tool-making abilities and complex social structures. The Denisovans left us almost nothing, a few fragments of bone, a handful of teeth, and their genetic legacy written in the DNA of modern populations scattered across Asia and Oceania. Yet from these meager physical remains, scientists have been able to piece together a remarkable story. The Denisovans were robust, cold-adapted people who thrived in some of the harshest environments on Earth. They lived not just in the relatively temperate regions where most early human fossils are found, but in the frigid mountains and steppes of Central Asia, in conditions that would challenge even the most hardy modern humans equipped with advanced technology and sophisticated clothing. Their range was vast, stretching from the Altai Mountains of Siberia down through Tibet and into Southeast Asia. They were the first humans to successfully colonize the high-altitude environments of the Tibetan Plateau, developing genetic adaptations that allowed them to thrive in the thin air and extreme cold of those elevated regions. These adaptations changes in their genes that allowed their blood to carry oxygen more efficiently were so successful that they persist today in Tibetan populations, who inherited these beneficial mutations through interbreeding that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. The caves where Denisovans lived tell their own story of adaptation and survival. In Denisova Cave itself, archaeologists have found evidence of sophisticated stone tool technology, jewelry made from carved bone and stone, and the remains of a remarkable variety of animal species that served as food. These were primitive people struggling at the edge of survival. They were successful hunters and gatherers who had developed complex strategies for thriving in one of the world's most challenging environments. The cave itself is a natural time capsule, its layers of sediment preserving a record of human occupation that spans more than 200,000 years. As you descend through these layers, moving backward through time, you encounter evidence of multiple human species, modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, sometimes living in the same cave at different times, sometimes even overlapping in their occupation. The thought that these different branches of humanity might have encountered each other, might have competed for the same resources, might have shared knowledge and genes, adds layers of complexity to our understanding of human evolution. In the deepest, oldest layers of the cave, archaeologists have found Denisovan remains alongside sophisticated stone tools and evidence of controlled fire-use dating back over 200,000 years. These people weren't just surviving in the harsh Siberian environment, they were mastering it, developing technologies and strategies that allowed them to not just endure, but flourish in conditions that would kill most modern humans within hours. The mystery deepens when we consider their genetic legacy. While the Denisovans themselves vanished from the archaeological record sometime between 40,000 and 50,000 years ago, their genes live on in modern populations. People across Asia and Oceania, from the highlands of New Guinea to the islands of the Philippines, carry Denisovan DNA in their cells, evidence of ancient encounters and interbreeding that occurred as our ancestors spread across the globe. In some populations, particularly among the peoples of New Guinea and Australia, Denisovan ancestry makes up as much as 5% of the modern genome. This isn't just a statistical curiosity. It represents real, functional genetic material that continues to influence human biology today. Some of these inherited genes provide advantages for living at high altitudes. Others may influence immune system function, and still others remain mysterious in their purpose and effect. The implications of this genetic legacy are profound. It means that as your own ancestors were learning to control fire and survive in caves like the one you reimagining yourself in, they were also encountering and interacting with Denisovans. These weren't hostile encounters between competing species. They were meetings between closely related humans that resulted in successful reproduction and the passing on of beneficial genetic material. Picture these encounters: small groups of early humans meeting in valleys or at water sources, perhaps initially wary, but gradually learning to communicate, to trade, to share knowledge about surviving in harsh environments. The Denisovans might have taught your ancestors crucial skills for surviving at high altitudes or in extreme cold. In return, your ancestors might have shared their own innovations and survival strategies. But what happened to the Denisovans themselves? Why did a people who were so successful, so well adapted to their environment, disappear so completely that we only discovered their existence through genetic analysis? This is where the mystery becomes most haunting, most poignant in its implications for understanding the fragility of even the most successful human adaptations. Climate change likely played a crucial role in their disappearance. The period between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago was marked by significant environmental shifts, with ice ages advancing and retreating, changing the landscapes and ecosystems that the Denisovans had spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to. Forests turned to grasslands, grasslands became deserts, and the large mammals that formed the foundation of their hunting economy began to decline. But climate change alone doesn't explain their complete disappearance. The Denisovans had survived multiple ice ages before, had adapted to dramatic environmental changes over hundreds of millennia. Something else must have happened, something that pushed them beyond their remarkable capacity for adaptation and survival. Competition with other human species may have been a factor. This was a period when multiple human lineages, modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, were all competing for the same resources across Eurasia. Modern humans, with their own sophisticated technologies and social structures, were expanding their range and may have gradually outcompeted the Denisovans for crucial resources. Disease could have played a devastating role. When different human populations with different evolutionary histories come into contact, they often exchange pathogens along with genes and ideas. A disease that one population had developed resistance to over thousands of generations could prove catastrophic for a population that had never encountered it before. The same genetic isolation that had allowed the Denisovans to develop their unique adaptations might have left them vulnerable to new diseases introduced by contact with other human groups. Population size may have been the critical factor. Genetic analysis suggests that Denisovan populations were always relatively small, perhaps never numbering more than a few thousand individuals across their entire range. While this small population size allowed them to maintain their genetic distinctiveness, it also made them vulnerable to the kind of demographic catastrophes that can drive entire species to extinction. In small populations, every death matters more. A harsh winter that kills a significant percentage of the population, a failed hunting season that leads to starvation, an outbreak of disease, any of these events could push a small population below the threshold needed for long-term survival. Once a population becomes too small, genetic diversity decreases, making the group even more vulnerable to future challenges. The Denisovans also faced the challenge of living in some of the most extreme environments on Earth. While their adaptations allowed them to thrive in these conditions, it also meant they were specialized for a very specific ecological niche. When that niche disappeared or changed dramatically, they may have lacked the flexibility to adapt to new conditions quickly enough to survive. Archaeological evidence suggests that the final Denisovan populations were increasingly isolated, living in small, scattered groups separated by vast distances. This isolation, which had once been a source of strength, allowing them to develop unique local adaptations, became a weakness as it prevented the kind of gene flow and cultural exchange that might have helped them respond to new challenges. The last known Denisovan remains date to somewhere between 40,000 and 50,000 years ago, but even this dating is uncertain. It's possible that small populations survived much longer in remote locations, gradually dwindling in size until they simply couldn't maintain viable breeding populations. Their disappearance wasn't necessarily a single catastrophic event. It may have been a slow fade, a gradual attrition that took place over thousands of years. The caves they left behind tell a story of a people who are innovative, adaptive, and successful for hundreds of thousands of years. They developed sophisticated stone tool technologies, created jewelry and art objects, controlled fire, and lived in complex social groups. They were fully human in every meaningful sense, with rich cultural lives and deep knowledge of their environments. Yet they left behind almost no fossils, no cave paintings, no monumental architecture, nothing of the sort that usually marks the presence of successful human societies. This absence is itself a mystery. Were they simply less inclined to create permanent records of their presence? Did they express their creativity and spirituality in ways that didn't survive in the archaeological record? Or has time and chance simply erased most of the evidence of their existence? The Denisovans represent one of the great what-ifs of human history. What might have happened if they had survived? What knowledge did they possess that died with them? What innovations might they have contributed to the human story if they had been able to continue their evolutionary journey alongside modern humans and Neanderthals? Their ghost lives on, not just in the DNA of modern populations, but in the questions they raise about human evolution, adaptation, and survival. They remind us that success in one environment, even success that lasts for hundreds of thousands of years, doesn't guarantee survival when conditions change. They show us that human evolution wasn't a simple linear progression from primitive to advanced, but a complex branching tree with many lineages exploring different paths to survival and success. In the end, the Denisovans vanished as completely as smoke dispersing in a cave, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their existence. But those traces tell a story of remarkable human resilience, adaptation, and the endless creativity of our species in finding ways to survive and thrive in even the most challenging environments. They were our cousins, our contemporaries, and in some ways, our teachers, passing on genetic gifts that continue to help modern humans survive in the harsh environments their ancestors once called home. As you sit by your imaginary fire in that prehistoric cave, breathing the smoky air and feeling the cold seep through your layers of hide and fur, remember that other fires once burned in other caves, tended by hands that were almost like yours, warmed by flames that have long since gone cold. The Denisovans are gone, but their story continues in the genes of millions of people alive today, a testament to the complex, interconnected nature of human evolution and the enduring legacy of those who came before us. Now, as the fire settles into its steady rhythm and the shadows dance across the cave walls around you, turn your attention to those walls themselves. In the flickering light, you begin to notice something extraordinary, marks that are not random scratches or natural formations, but deliberate, purposeful images that speak across tens of thousands of years. These are the paintings behind the flame, the secret messages left by hands that knew cold and hunger and fear, but also possessed something that transcended mere survival, the irrepressible human need to create, to communicate, to leave a mark that says, I was here, I existed, I mattered. The cave walls of Europe are galleries that predate any museum, any cathedral, any monument ever built by human hands. In the depths of Chauvet Cave in France, Altamira in Spain, Lascaux in the Dordogne, and dozens of other sacred underground spaces, early humans created some of the most profound and mysterious art in all of human history. These weren't casual doodles or simple records of daily life. They were sophisticated, intentional works of art that required planning, skill, and a deep understanding of both artistic technique and the spiritual significance of the act of creation itself. Imagine yourself as one of those ancient artists, moving carefully through the cave's passages, carrying a torch made from juniper wood, or a simple oil lamp carved from stone and filled with animal fat. The flame casts a warm, golden light that brings the cave walls to life, revealing the natural contours and textures of the limestone that you will use as your canvas. But this isn't just about finding a suitable surface. You're looking for something more specific, more meaningful. You're searching for the perfect spot where the cave's natural architecture will enhance your artistic vision. A bulge in the wall that could suggest the rounded flank of a bison. A crack that might become the graceful curve of a horse's neck. A depression that could transform into the eye of a mammoth, staring out from the stone with an intelligence that seems almost alive in the dancing torchlight. These are at random locations. They are carefully chosen sacred spaces where the boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds becomes thin. The preparation of your materials is itself a ritual, a process that connects you to the very essence of the world around you. The pigments you use aren't simply purchased from a supplier. They're gathered from the earth itself, each color carrying the power and symbolism of its origin. The ochre that creates the warm reds and yellows comes from iron-rich clay deposits that you've walked miles to find. Clay that you've carefully processed by grinding it between stones, mixing it with water or animal fat to achieve exactly the right consistency. The black pigment is perhaps the most significant of all. It's made from charcoal, from wood that has been transformed by fire into something else entirely. But not just any charcoal will do. You use charcoal made from specific types of wood, carefully selected and deliberately burned in controlled conditions. Sometimes you use manganese dioxide, a mineral that creates a deep, rich black that has an almost metallic quality in the torchlight. Each pigment is precious, representing hours of work and intimate knowledge of the landscape's resources. But the most mysterious and powerful pigment of all is the one that comes from your own body, the red ochre mixed with blood, spit, or other bodily fluids that creates not just color, but a literal connection between yourself and the image you're recreating. When you press your hand against the cave wall and blow pigment around it through a hollow bone or reed, you're not just making a handprint, you're leaving a part of yourself permanently bonded to the stone, creating a bridge between your mortal body and the eternal cave. The technique of creating these handprints found in caves across Europe and dating back over 40,000 years is more complex than it might initially appear. You don't simply dip your hand in paint and press it against the wall. Instead, you place your hand flat against the stone and then blow pigment around it, creating a negative image where your hand appears in the natural color of the rock, surrounded by a halo of color. This technique requires considerable skill and practice controlling the flow of pigment through your improvised airbrush, maintaining consistent pressure and distance, ensuring even coverage while avoiding drips and runs. The choice of which hand to use carries deep significance. Analysis of thousands of handprints across European caves reveals that both left and right hands were used, but not randomly. The positioning suggests that many were made by people reaching across their bodies, creating prints with their non-dominant hand in positions that would have been awkward and uncomfortable. This wasn't about convenience. It was about ritual significance, about the symbolic meaning of the gesture itself. Some of the handprints show missing fingers, and for decades archaeologists debated whether these represented ritual mutilation, frostbite, or simply hands positioned with fingers folded. Recent analysis suggests that many of these missing fingers were likely deliberately bent during the printing process, creating symbolic messages that we're only beginning to understand. The hands with missing pinkies, with folded ring fingers, with thumbs pressed against palms, these may represent a form of sign language, a way of encoding specific messages or meanings into the handprints themselves. But the handprints are just the beginning of the artistic tradition that flourished in these underground galleries. The animal paintings that dominate the cave walls represent some of the most sophisticated and accurate wildlife art ever created. These aren't primitive stick figures or crude representations. They're anatomically precise, psychologically penetrating portraits of the animals that shared the Ice Age world with early humans. The horses of Shavat Cave seemed to breathe in the torchlight, their nostrils flared, their eyes alert and intelligent. A technique used to create them demonstrates a deep understanding of artistic principles that wouldn't be codified in art schools for tens of thousands of years. The artists used the natural contours of the cave walls to create three-dimensional effects, making the animals appear to emerge from the stone itself. They understood perspective, proportion, and the use of light and shadow to create depth and movement. The bison of Altamira, painted on the cave ceiling, take advantage of natural bulges in the limestone to create a stunning illusion of three-dimensionality. When viewed by torchlight, these animals seem to move and shift, their muscles rippling beneath their hides, their massive heads turning to follow the viewer's movement through the cave. The artists who created them had to work in cramped, uncomfortable positions, lying on their backs or contorting their bodies to reach the ceiling. Yet the quality of their work never suffered. The mammoths, cave lions, rhinoceroses, and other now extinct megafauna depicted in these caves are portrayed with an accuracy that could only come from intimate, daily familiarity with these animals. These weren't drawn from imagination or distant memory. They were created by people who lived alongside these creatures, who hunted them, feared them, and understood their behavior with the kind of deep knowledge that comes from a lifetime of careful observation. But why create these images in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of caves, far from living areas and often requiring dangerous crawls through narrow passages to reach? The location of these paintings suggests that they weren't meant for casual viewing or everyday decoration. They were created in sacred spaces, in the belly of the earth itself, where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of spirits became permeable. The caves themselves were seen as gateways to the underworld, places where the spirits of animals and ancestors could be contacted and communicated with. The act of painting in these deep chambers wasn't just artistic expression. It was ritual, ceremony, perhaps even a form of hunting magic designed to ensure success in the dangerous pursuit of massive Ice Age predators. The flickering torchlight that illuminated these ancient artists at work created an effect that modern viewers, with their steady electric illumination, can barely imagine. In the dancing shadows cast by flame, the painted animals seemed to come alive, to move and breathe and interact with each other across the cave walls. The art wasn't static, it was dynamic, changing and shifting as the light moved, creating a kind of prehistoric cinema where painted bison could seem to charge across the stone, and painted horses could appear to gallop through the underground darkness. The artists understood this effect and used it deliberately, positioning their images to take maximum advantage of the way torchlight would animate them. They painted sequences of animals that told stories, created compositions that revealed different meanings depending on the angle and intensity of the light viewing them. They were not just painters, they were the world's first cinematographers, creating moving images through the interplay of static art and dynamic light. The pigments themselves were applied using a variety of techniques that demonstrate remarkable sophistication. Fingers were used to smear and blend colors, creating subtle gradations and soft effects. Brushes made from animal hair or chewed sticks created fine lines and detailed work. But perhaps most remarkably, the artists developed a form of airbrushing, using hollow bones or reeds to blow pigment onto the cave walls, creating effects that wouldn't be seen again in human art for tens of thousands of years. The composition of these cave paintings reveals an understanding of artistic principles that seems almost impossibly advanced for the time period. The animals are arranged in complex, multi-layered scenes that demonstrate awareness of foreground and background, of spatial relationships and visual hierarchy. Some paintings show herds of animals moving together across the cave walls, with individual animals positioned to create a sense of depth and movement that draws the viewer's eye through the composition. The choice of animals depicted is not random, it's highly selective and symbolic. While archaeological evidence shows that early humans hunted a wide variety of species, the cave paintings focus on a much smaller selection of animals, primarily large, dangerous predators and prey species. Horses, bison, aurochs, mammoths, cave lions, and rhinoceroses dominate the caves, while smaller game animals that would have been more commonly hunted for food are rarely depicted. This selective representation suggests that the paintings weren't simple records of daily life or hunting activities. They were something more symbolic, more spiritual perhaps, representations of the most powerful and significant animals in the Ice Age world, the creatures that embodied the raw forces of nature that early humans had to understand and propitiate in order to survive. The absence of human figures in most cave paintings is striking and significant. While animals are depicted with extraordinary detail and accuracy, humans appear only rarely, and when they do, they're often highly stylized or abstracted. This suggests a worldview in which humans saw themselves as part of a larger natural order dominated by the animal kingdom, rather than as its masters or conquerors. When humans do appear in cave art, they're often shown in shamanic or ritual contexts, figures with animal heads or features, dancing or performing ceremonies, sometimes appearing to transform into animals themselves. These rare human images provide glimpses into the spiritual and religious life of Ice Age peoples, suggesting complex belief systems, centered around the relationship between humans and animals, between the natural and supernatural worlds. The hands that created these masterpieces were the same hands that struggled daily with the basic challenges of survival, finding food, maintaining fire, staying warm, avoiding predators. Yet these people found time and energy to descend into the dangerous depths of caves and create art of breathtaking beauty and sophistication. This tells us something profound about what it means to be human. That even in the most challenging circumstances, even when survival itself is uncertain, humans feel compelled to create, to express, to leave something beautiful behind. The preservation of these paintings is itself remarkable. The stable temperature and humidity of deep caves, combined with the mineral content of the cave walls, created perfect conditions for preserving organic pigments for tens of thousands of years. But this preservation is also fragile exposure to modern air, changes in temperature, and humidity, and even the breath and body heat of too many visitors can cause rapid deterioration of these ancient masterpieces. The discovery of these caves in the modern era has been a gradual process spanning more than a century. Altamira was first discovered in 1868, but the significance of its paintings wasn't recognized until 1879. And even then, the scientific community was initially skeptical that such sophisticated art could be so ancient. It wasn't until the discovery of additional caves and the development of more sophisticated dating techniques that the true age and significance of these paintings became clear. Each newly discovered cave adds to our understanding of Ice Age art and culture. The 1994 discovery of Chauvet Cave, with its spectacular paintings dating back over 30,000 years, revolutionized our understanding of the development of human artistic ability. The quality and sophistication of the earliest known cave art suggested that humans had achieved remarkable artistic capabilities much earlier than previously thought. The techniques used by these ancient artists continue to inspire and inform modern artists and scientists. Studies of cave painting pigments have contributed to our understanding of prehistoric technology and resource use. Analysis of the artistic techniques has provided insights into the cognitive abilities and cultural sophistication of Ice Age peoples. The cave paintings serve as a bridge between the ancient and modern worlds, demonstrating that the human impulse to create art transcends time, culture, and circumstances. As you sit in your imaginary cave, surrounded by the smoke and shadows of your own fire, imagine the artist who once sat in the same spot, preparing pigments and planning the images that would speak across millennia. Feel the weight of that responsibility. The knowledge that what you create here, in this sacred underground space, will outlast your own life, your children's lives, and the lives of countless generations yet to come. The paintings behind the flame are more than just art. They're messages from our ancestors, reminders of our shared humanity, and evidence of the unquenchable human spirit that finds ways to create beauty, even in the darkest and most challenging times. They speak to us across the vast gulf of time, whispering secrets about what it means to be human, what it means to create, and what it means to leave something of ourselves behind for those who will come after us. As the flames cast their final dancing shadows across those ancient painted walls, turn your attention now to the living figures gathered around your fire, the small band of humans whose survival depends not just on their individual skills and courage, but on the complex web of relationships, hierarchies, and unspoken agreements that bind them together into something greater than the sum of their parts. Here, in the flickering light of the cave, power moves in subtle currents as invisible as the smoke that rises from your fire, yet as essential to survival as the flame itself. Watch carefully as the day's hunt returns, and you'll begin to see the intricate social machinery that determines who lives, who leads, and who makes the decisions that can mean the difference between survival and death for the entire group. The distribution of meat from a successful hunt might seem like a simple matter of sharing food, but it is actually one of the most complex and politically charged activities in prehistoric life. a carefully choreographed dance of power, obligation, and social positioning that reveals the hidden hierarchies governing every aspect of cave-dwelling society. The figure who steps forward first to examine the day's kill isn't necessarily the largest or strongest member of the group, nor even the one who struck the killing blow. This is the clan leader, and their authority comes from sources far more subtle and enduring than brute force. Perhaps it's an older woman whose knowledge of seasonal patterns and food storage has kept the group alive through multiple harsh winters. Maybe it's a middle-aged man whose skill at reading the weather and animal behavior has led to more successful hunts than failures. Or it could be someone whose ability to mediate disputes and maintain group cohesion has prevented the kind of social fractures that spell doom for small communities living at the edge of survival. The power of the clan leader is written in gestures so small and automatic that they seem natural, inevitable. The way others step aside to give them the first view of the kill. The brief pause before anyone speaks, waiting for their assessment. The subtle shift in posture that ripples through the group as their mood and decisions influence everyone else's reactions. This isn't the dramatic, obvious authority of kings and emperors. It's the quiet, essential leadership that emerges from competence, wisdom, and the group's recognition that some individuals possess the rare combination of skills necessary to keep everyone alive. But this power comes with a burden that would crush many modern leaders. The clan leader doesn't just make decisions, they bear the psychological weight of every choice's consequences. When food is scarce, they must decide who gets the largest portions and who must make do with less. When danger threatens, they must choose whether to fight, flee, or hide, knowing that a wrong decision could mean death for people they've known since birth. When disputes arise, they must find solutions that preserve group unity, even when personal loyalties pull them in different directions. The selection of a clan leader isn't a formal process with elections or ceremonies. Instead, it emerges organically from the group's dynamics, often over years or even decades. Someone begins to be consulted more frequently about important decisions. Their opinions carry more weight in discussions. Others defer to their judgment in moments of uncertainty. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, they become the person the group looks to when leadership is needed, not because they sought power, but because they demonstrated the qualities that make power necessary and effective. These qualities are complex and multifaceted. Physical prowess matters, but it's not paramount. A leader who can't hunt or defend the group loses credibility quickly. But raw strength without wisdom leads to disasters that small communities can't survive. Intelligence is crucial, but it must be practical intelligence. The ability to read weather patterns, understand animal behavior, remember the locations of water sources and food caches, and synthesize countless bits of environmental information into survival strategies. Perhaps most importantly, the clan leader must possess what we might call emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and manage the complex interpersonal dynamics that can make or break small groups living in close quarters under constant stress. They must know when to be firm and when to show flexibility, when to intervene in disputes, and when to let conflicts resolve themselves. When to push the group toward necessary but difficult decisions, and when to allow time for consensus to emerge naturally. The daily exercise of this leadership is visible in dozens of small decisions and interactions. When the group wakes each morning, the leader's assessment of weather, food supplies, and group mood influences whether the day will be spent hunting, gathering, tool making, or simply resting and conserving energy. Their reading of individual group members' physical and emotional states determines work assignments, with the sick, injured, or emotionally fragile giving tasks appropriate to their current capabilities. The positioning of sleeping areas within the cave reflects and reinforces the leader's authority, while also demonstrating their responsibility for the group's welfare. The leader typically sleeps in a position that allows them to monitor the cave entrance and the fire, but also close enough to the most vulnerable members of the group the children, the elderly, the sick, to respond quickly if protection is needed. This positioning isn't just strategic. It's symbolic, a constant reminder that leadership means placing the group's needs above personal comfort or safety. When conflicts arise, as they inevitably do in small groups living under constant stress, the leader's response reveals the sophisticated understanding of human psychology that effective prehistoric leadership required. Direct confrontation often escalates tensions in ways that small groups can't afford, so skilled leaders develop subtle techniques for diffusing conflicts before they become destructive. They might redirect a dispute by assigning the conflicting parties separate tasks that require their full attention. They might use humor to reduce tension, or share food or other resources in ways that address the underlying needs driving the conflict. The distribution of resources, particularly food, but also tools, weapons, and prime spots near the fire, becomes a constant exercise in political balancing. The leader must ensure that the group has most valuable members receive what they need to continue contributing to group survival, while also maintaining enough equity to prevent resentment and social fragmentation. This often means making decisions that seem harsh by modern standards, giving smaller portions to the less productive members, or denying requests from those whose contributions don't match their consumption. But effective leaders also understand that pure pragmatism can be counterproductive. The elderly member who can no longer hunt might possess crucial knowledge about finding water during droughts or identifying edible plants during food shortages. The child who seems to consume more than they contribute will, with luck and proper care, become a future hunter or gatherer whose skills will keep the group alive for decades to come. The injured hunter who requires extra care and resources today might recover to become an even more valuable group member tomorrow. The leader's relationship with the group's spiritual and cultural life adds another layer of complexity to their role. They often serve as the primary keeper of the group's oral traditions, responsible for maintaining the stories, songs, and rituals that preserve essential survival knowledge and reinforce group identity. They might be the one who decides when and how to create cave paintings, who participates in rituals, and how to interpret omens and natural signs that could influence the group's decisions. This spiritual leadership isn't separate from practical leadership. It's integral to it. The stories and rituals that the leader maintains and transmits aren't just entertainment or abstract spiritual practices. They're sophisticated information storage and transmission systems that encode crucial survival knowledge in memorable, culturally meaningful forms. The stories about successful hunts preserve information about animal behavior and hunting techniques. The rituals surrounding food preparation and sharing reinforce social bonds and resource sharing, agreements that keep the group functioning during times of scarcity. The leader's knowledge extends far beyond the immediate needs of daily survival. They must understand the seasonal cycles that determine when and where different resources will be available. They need to know the territorial boundaries and behavior patterns of neighboring human groups, and how to manage relationships with these potential allies or competitors. They must be able to read the subtle environmental signs that indicate changing weather patterns, animal migrations, and other factors that could dramatically impact the group's survival prospects. This knowledge isn't just intellectual, it's embodied, intuitive, developed through years of careful observation and experience. The leader knows not just that certain berries ripen in late summer, but exactly which hillsides will have the best fruit, how to tell when they're at peak ripeness, and how to process and store them for maximum nutritional value and longevity. They understand not just that winter storms come from certain directions, but how to read the subtle changes in air pressure, wind patterns, and animal behavior that herald their approach hours or even days in advance. The burden of this knowledge is immense. The leader carries in their memory the accumulated wisdom of generations, but they also bear the responsibility of passing it on accurately and completely to the next generation. A forgotten detail about food processing could lead to poisoning. A misremembered instruction about tool-making could result in weapons that fail at crucial moments. An incorrect assessment of weather patterns could send the group into dangerous situations during critical hunting or gathering expeditions. The psychological pressure of leadership in such circumstances would be crushing for most people. Every decision carries life or death consequences, not just for the leader, but for every person in their care. The weight of constant responsibility combined with the stress of living always at the edge of survival takes a toll that shows in the archaeological record. Many skeletal remains from this period show evidence of the kind of chronic stress that comes from prolonged periods of high responsibility and resource scarcity. Yet somehow, these leaders found ways not just to survive, but to help their groups thrive in conditions that would quickly overwhelm most modern people. They developed mental and emotional resilience that allowed them to make difficult decisions without being paralyzed by doubt or guilt. They learned to compartmentalize their own needs and desires in service of the group's survival, while still maintaining the emotional connections and personal relationships that make leadership legitimate and effective. The relationship between the leader and the group's children reveals another crucial aspect of prehistoric leadership. Children represent the group's future, but they're also its most vulnerable members, requiring protection and resources while contributing little to immediate survival needs. The leader must balance the group as short-term survival requirements against the long-term necessity of ensuring that enough children survive to carry on the group's genetic and cultural legacy. This often means making heartbreaking decisions during times of extreme scarcity. When food runs low, how much should be reserved for children versus allocated to the adults whose hunting and gathering abilities keep everyone alive? When danger threatens, how much risk should the group accept to protect children who might not survive anyway versus preserving the adults who could establish new families if necessary? These decisions, unthinkable in modern societies with their safety nets and abundance, were routine aspects of prehistoric leadership. The leader's own reproductive choices become matters of group survival strategy. Their decision about when to have children, with whom to form partnerships, and how to balance parental responsibilities with leadership duties affects not just their own genetic legacy, but the group's overall survival prospects. A leader distracted by infant care might make poor decisions that endanger everyone, but a leader who fails to reproduce might leave the group without qualified successors when their own abilities begin to decline with age. The transition of leadership presents one of the most delicate challenges in prehistoric group dynamics. Unlike modern political systems with their formal succession procedures, prehistoric leadership transitions had to occur organically, often gradually, as the established leader's abilities declined and newer members demonstrated their competence. This process could take years and involved complex negotiations of status, responsibility, and authority that required extraordinary diplomatic skill to manage without fragmenting the group. Sometimes these transitions occurred smoothly, with experienced leaders gradually sharing more responsibilities with capable successors, while retaining advisory roles that preserved their dignity and continued to benefit from their wisdom. But other times, leadership transitions created conflicts that could tear groups apart, especially when multiple individuals had legitimate claims to leadership or when the established leader was reluctant to cede authority, even as their abilities declined. The seasonal cycles that governed prehistoric life created rhythmic patterns of leadership challenge and adaptation. During abundant summer months, when food was plentiful and the weather mild, leadership requirements were relatively light. The main challenges involved organizing gathering and hunting activities, managing surplus resources, and maintaining social harmony during periods of relative leisure. But as winter approached and resources became scarce, the leader's skills became crucial to survival, and the group's tolerance for poor decision-making disappeared entirely. These seasonal pressures created natural tests of leadership competence. A leader who made poor decisions during the summer might see their authority gradually erode as the group prepared for winter. Conversely, a leader who successfully guided the group through a harsh winter emerged with enhanced authority and respect that could last for years. The annual cycle of abundance and scarcity created regular opportunities for leadership to be challenged, validated, or transferred based on demonstrated competence rather than arbitrary factors. The leader's relationship with neighboring groups added another dimension to their responsibilities. In a world where human populations were small and scattered, contact with other groups was both essential and dangerous. Other humans could be sources of new genetic material, trade opportunities, and shared knowledge that enhanced survival prospects. But they could also be competitors for scarce resources, sources of disease, or direct threats to the group's safety and territorial integrity. Managing these relationships required diplomatic skills that rivaled those of modern international relations. The leader had to assess other groups' intentions and capabilities, negotiate agreements for resource sharing or territorial boundaries, and maintain the delicate balance between cooperation and competition that characterized intergroup relations in prehistoric times. A leader who was too trusting might expose their group to exploitation or violence. One who was too suspicious might miss crucial opportunities for beneficial cooperation or trade. As you sit by your fire, watching the interplay of personalities and relationships within your imagined prehistoric group, you begin to understand that survival in these harsh conditions depended not just on individual skills and courage, but on the subtle, complex social machinery that effective leadership created and maintained. The clan leader's power might be invisible to casual observation, but it permeated every aspect of group life, shaping decisions large and small, influencing relationships and resource allocation, and ultimately determining whether the small band of humans gathered around the fire would see another dawn or become just another group that vanished into the unforgiving darkness of the Ice Age world. Picture yourself now standing at the threshold of that prehistoric cave, the stone archway framing a darkness that seems to breathe with the weight of millennia. The wind carries the scent of distant snow, and already you can feel the bite of cold air against your skin. Behind you, the landscape stretches away in endless waves of grass and scattered trees, beautiful but utterly unforgiving. This cave represents your only hope of shelter, your singular chance at surviving the night that approaches with the steady inevitability of prehistoric time. You step inside, and immediately the temperature drops. The stone walls, worn smooth by countless seasons of ice and thaw, radiate a cold that seems to seep through your clothing and settle deep in your bones. This is not the gentle coolness of modern air conditioning, controlled and temporary. This is the ancient cold of the earth itself, persistent and demanding, a cold that has claimed countless lives throughout the vast stretches of human prehistory. Your first instinct, like that of every human who has ever sought shelter in such a place, is to create fire. You gather what dry materials you can find, perhaps some dried grass that has blown into the cave entrance, a few twigs and branches that previous inhabitants have left behind. The process of creating flame from nothing is far more challenging than your modern experience suggests. There are no matches to strike, no lighter to click. Instead, you must rely on the ancient techniques of friction and spark, techniques that require patience, skill, and often countless attempts before success rewards your effort. When you finally coax that first precious flame to life, feeding it carefully with your gathered tinder, you feel a surge of triumph that speaks to something deep in your genetic memory. Fire represents life itself in this harsh world, the difference between survival and surrender to the relentless forces of nature. But as the flames grow stronger, and you begin to feel their warmth on your face, you discover the first harsh lesson of cave dwelling. The smoke has nowhere to go. Unlike the fireplaces of modern homes, with their carefully designed chimneys and ventilation systems, this cave fire creates a choking cloud that fills the enclosed space with startling speed. Your eyes begin to water almost immediately the acrid smoke stinging with an intensity that makes you gasp and cough. You try to position yourself to avoid the worst of it, but in the confines of the cave, there is no escaping the reality that fire and breathable air are often mutually exclusive companions. The smoke carries with it the complex chemistry of burning wood, grass, and whatever other organic materials you've managed to gather. It's not the clean, controlled burn of processed fuel, but the raw, unfiltered combustion of natural materials that may be damp, partially decayed, or mixed with substances that create particularly irritating fumes. Your lungs, accustomed to the relatively clean air of the modern world, rebel against this constant assault. You find yourself coughing frequently, your throat raw and scratchy, your chest tight with the effort of filtering out the particles that seem to coat every breath. Yet you cannot simply extinguish the fire and solve the problem. The warmth it provides is not merely comfort, it is survival itself. As the evening progresses and the temperature continues to drop, you realize that the choice is not between comfort and discomfort, but between breathing smoke and freezing to death. The cold of the cave is not simply unpleasant. It is actively dangerous, capable of draining the life from your body with patient, methodical efficiency. You notice how the prehistoric inhabitants of this space have tried to manage the problem. There are blackened areas on the ceiling where smoke has stained the stone over countless fires. The walls bear the marks of soot and flame, creating a record of human occupation that speaks to the constant struggle between the need for warmth and the challenge of maintaining breathable air. Perhaps there are small alcoves or side passages where the smoke is less dense, areas where the original inhabitants learned to position themselves for maximum comfort. But even in these relatively clear spaces, you discover that the cold continues its relentless assault. The stone floor beneath you seems to actively steal heat from your body, drawing warmth away faster than you can generate it. Every point of contact with the cave surfaces becomes a pathway for heat loss. And you begin to understand why prehistoric peoples developed such intimate knowledge of animal fur sleeping arrangements and the precise positioning of bodies to conserve precious warmth. The night sounds begin to filter into your consciousness as darkness settles fully outside the cave entrance. There are the calls of nocturnal animals, some familiar, others strange and unidentifiable. The wind picks up, and with it comes a new challenge. The fire that provides your life-sustaining warmth is also vulnerable to the air currents that sweep through the cave. You must constantly tend to it, feeding it fuel, adjusting its position, protecting it from drafts that could extinguish it entirely and leave you at the mercy of the cold darkness. As you crouch near the flames, trying to find that perfect balance between warmth and breathable air, you begin to appreciate the incredible skill that sustained human life in these conditions for thousands of years. Every aspect of fire management becomes a learned art. The selection of fuel, the arrangement of burning materials to minimize smoke, the strategic placement of the fire to maximize warmth while minimizing danger, the constant vigilance required to maintain the flames throughout the long hours of darkness. Your eyes continue to water and burn, and you find yourself developing a persistent cough that seems to echo off the stone walls around you. The sound becomes a constant companion, a reminder of the price paid for warmth and light in this ancient world. You begin to understand why respiratory ailments were such common afflictions among prehistoric peoples, why the simple act of breathing clean air was often a luxury reserved for the brief moments spent outside the shelter. Yet even as you struggle with these immediate physical challenges, you begin to sense the deeper psychological impact of cave dwelling. The darkness that lurks just beyond the circle of firelight seems to press against your consciousness, reminding you constantly of your vulnerability. The sounds that emerge from that darkness, the scratch of small creatures moving through the stone passages, the distant call of predators, the whisper of wind through unseen crevices, create a constant state of alertness that makes true rest nearly impossible. The smoke that burns your eyes and scratches your throat carries with it more than just the immediate discomfort of irritation. It represents the fundamental compromise that defined prehistoric life, the acceptance that survival itself required enduring conditions that would be considered unbearable by modern standards. There was no perfect solution, no ideal arrangement that could provide warmth, light, clean air, and safety simultaneously. Instead, there was only the careful management of competing needs, a constant negotiation between different forms of suffering to find the combination that was most survivable. As the hours pass and your body grows weary from the constant tension of maintaining the fire and managing the smoke, you begin to develop a deeper appreciation for the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The people who lived in these caves for generation after generation were not simply enduring hardship. They were creating culture, developing technology, raising children, and building the foundations of human civilization under conditions that would challenge the strongest modern survivor. The coughing that punctuates your breathing becomes a rhythm of its own, a percussion that accompanies the crackling of the fire and the whisper of wind through stone. It is a sound that would have been familiar to every human who ever sought shelter in such a place. A common thread that connects you across the vast spans of time to those ancient ancestors who faced the same fundamental challenges of warmth, light, and breathable air in the unforgiving embrace of stone and darkness. As you sit in the flickering light of your smoky fire, struggling with the harsh realities of prehistoric shelter, imagine for a moment that you are not alone in this ancient world. Picture other fires glowing in distant caves, other groups of humans facing the same challenges you now confront, but with faces subtly different from your own, with knowledge and skills developed along parallel paths of human evolution. These are the Denisovans, a remarkable lineage of humanity that once shared this planet with our direct ancestors, and whose mysterious disappearance represents one of the most haunting questions in all of human prehistory. The story of the Denisovans begins not with grand archaeological discoveries or ancient texts, but with the painstaking analysis of a single finger, bone smaller than your thumb, discovered in 2008 in the depths of Denisova, cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. This tiny fragment, along with a few teeth and additional bone fragments, would revolutionize our understanding of human evolution and reveal the existence of an entire branch of humanity that had been completely unknown to modern science. When researchers first extracted DNA from that small finger bone, they expected to find genetic material belonging to either Neanderthals or modern humans, the two human lineages that were known to have inhabited the region during the Middle Paleolithic period. Instead, they discovered something entirely unexpected, a genetic signature that was distinctly human, yet unlike anything previously encountered. The DNA told a story of a population that had diverged from the common ancestor of modern humans and Neanderthals hundreds of thousands of years ago, developing in isolation to become a distinct human species. The Denisovans, named after the cave where they were first discovered, lived alongside both Neanderthals and early modern humans for tens of thousands of years. They inhabited vast stretches of Asia, from the frigid mountains of Siberia to the tropical highlands of New Guinea, adapting to environments that ranged from Arctic tundra to dense jungle. Like you, struggling now with the challenges of cave dwelling, they too sought shelter in stone refuges, built fires against the cold, and faced the daily struggle for survival that defined prehistoric existence. But what makes the Denisovan story particularly remarkable is not just their existence, but the intimate ways in which their lives intertwined with those of our direct ancestors. Genetic analysis has revealed that Denisovans and modern humans did not simply coexist in the same landscapes they met. They interacted, and they formed relationships that produced children who carried the genetic heritage of both lineages. Today, scattered throughout the DNA of modern populations, particularly among the peoples of Melanesia, Australia, and parts of Asia, lie fragments of Denisovan genetic material. These ancient genetic signatures, tell us that somewhere in the misty depths of prehistory, perhaps around fires very much like the one that now warms your face, Denisovan individuals and early modern humans came together in relationships that would echo through tens of thousands of years to reach us in the present day. The implications of this genetic intermingling are profound and continue to shape human biology in ways we are only beginning to understand. Some of the Denisovan genetic variants that persist in modern populations appear to confer advantages for survival in specific environments. For instance, Tibetan populations carry Denisovan genetic variants that help them process oxygen more efficiently at high altitudes, a trait that proved crucial for survival in the thin air of the Himalayan plateau. Similarly, some Inuit populations possess Denisovan genetic variants that may help them metabolize fats more effectively, an adaptation that could have been vital for survival in Arctic environments where traditional carbohydrate sources were scarce. These genetic gifts from our Denisovan relatives remind us that the prehistoric world was not a place of isolated human populations developing in complete separation from one another. Instead, it was a complex tapestry of interaction, migration, and genetic exchange that created the rich diversity of human adaptations we see today. The cave shelter that now protects you from the elements may have once housed not just early modern humans, but also Denisovans, Neanderthals, or even individuals who carried genetic material from multiple human lineages. Yet for all the genetic evidence of their presence and influence, the Denisovans themselves remain remarkably elusive. Unlike the Neanderthals, who left behind extensive archaeological evidence including tools, burial sites, and even artistic expressions, the Denisovans have left only the faintest traces of their material culture. Apart from a few stone tools and the precious bone fragments from Denisova Cave, they exist primarily as genetic ghosts. Their presence detected not through the artifacts they created, but through the DNA they contributed to the human gene pool. This archaeological invisibility makes the Denisovan disappearance all the more mysterious and poignant. We know they existed across vast geographical areas and survived for hundreds of thousands of years, successfully adapting to diverse environments and thriving in conditions that would challenge even the most skilled modern survivalists. Yet somehow, despite their evident success and adaptability, they vanished from the archaeological record, leaving behind only those genetic whispers that continue to flow through modern human populations. The question of what happened to the Denisovans haunts researchers who study human evolution. Did they gradually merge with other human populations through interbreeding, their distinct identities slowly dissolving into the broader human gene pool? Were they overcome by environmental changes that exceeded even their remarkable adaptability? Did they fall victim to competition with other human groups, or to diseases that swept through their populations with devastating effect? Perhaps the answer lies in the very caves that sheltered them, in the smoke-filled refuges where Denisovan families, gathered around fires, faced the same challenges of cold and darkness that you now experience, and made the countless small decisions that ultimately determined their survival or extinction. Each cave fire that flickered out, each harsh winter that claimed lives, each generation that failed to produce enough children to maintain the population, contributed to the gradual decline of a human lineage that had survived for hundreds of millennia. The Denisovan story reminds us of the profound fragility that underlies all human existence, even in the face of remarkable adaptability and success. They were not primitive or unsuccessful indeed. Their genetic contributions suggest they possessed adaptations that proved valuable enough to persist in modern human populations tens of thousands of years after their own disappearance. They were sophisticated enough to create tools, to control fire, to survive in environments that ranged from frozen tundra to tropical highlands. Yet despite all their achievements and adaptations, they could not escape the fundamental vulnerability that defines the human condition. The same harsh environments that shaped their remarkable genetic adaptations ultimately proved, too, challenging for their continued survival as a distinct population. The caves that sheltered them became monuments to their absence, silent witnesses to the disappearance of an entire branch of humanity. As you sit in your own cave shelter, surrounded by the smoke and cold that they too must have endured, you can almost sense their presence in the flickering shadows cast by your fire. Perhaps Denisovan hands once warmed themselves at fires built in this very spot. Perhaps Denisovan children once huddled against the cold in these stone chambers, their parents telling stories that are now lost forever to the silence of deep time. The genetic evidence tells us that their story did not end with complete extinction. Fragments of their DNA continue to flow through millions of modern humans, carrying forward adaptations that still serve us today. In this sense, the Denisovans achieved a form of immortality, their genetic legacy woven so thoroughly into the fabric of human diversity that they remain part of us even in their absence. But the loss of their distinct culture, their unique perspective on the world, their particular solutions to the challenges of survival, represents an irreplaceable diminishment of human diversity. Each extinct human lineage takes with it countless innovations, adaptations, and ways of understanding the world that can never be recovered or replicated. The Denisovan disappearance serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly human fortunes can change, how populations that seem successful and well adapted can vanish with startling suddenness when faced with challenges that exceed their capacity to respond. It reminds us that survival in the prehistoric world was never guaranteed, regardless of intelligence, adaptability, or cultural sophistication. In the gentle crackling of your cave fire, you might hear an echo of all the Denisovan fires that once burned bright against the prehistoric darkness, each one representing a family, a community, a generation that faced the same fundamental challenges you now confront. Their disappearance transforms every prehistoric cave into a kind of memorial, a reminder that the human story could have unfolded very differently, and that our own presence here represents not inevitability, but the fortunate outcome of countless small victories over the forces that claim human lives. The smoke that stings your eyes carries with it the poignancy of that loss, the knowledge that somewhere in the vast sweep of prehistoric time, the last Denisovan fire flickered out, the last Denisovan voice fell silent, and an entire way of being human vanished forever into the endless darkness that surrounds all human endeavor. Yet in that same smoke, if you listen carefully, you might also hear the whisper of their genetic legacy, still flowing through modern human populations, still contributing to our survival, still connecting us across the vast spans of time to those remarkable relatives who shared our world and shaped our destiny in ways we are only beginning to understand.